Our next topic of conversation is feelings of trauma and just how trauma manifests and just what our experiences of trauma can be. So traumatic, I mean, a great supervisor I used to have, great friend, PhD psychologist who actually has wrote her dissertation in trauma and does a lot of trauma work, said basically trauma is, well, everything. And nothing is traumatic. And so really for us, we have to think about how trauma affects us. We've all been through trauma. To be human is to go through something traumatic. What might be the most traumatizing thing that happened to you, Omar, might be my Tuesday, or vice versa. Or what might be something that was really traumatic to me, Omar, you might say, really, man? That was the most traumatic thing for you. Oh, man, that's okay. And so it really is defined to that person and how it affects that person.
Yeah.
And I feel like what happens is sometimes we have to kind of one-up each other on trauma at times, just culturally speaking. Or another thing that I've noticed is people say, well, my trauma wasn't that bad. Other people had it worse than I did. That may be true. But what you've gone through is still your story and what you've gone through. Your trauma is still your trauma. You still have to recover from it.
I heard a really good explanation of that principle in general, where it was related to economics. So that if you put 100 people in a room and say, divide yourselves into, by thirds into lower, middle, and upper class, that 90 people will mark that they're in the middle class. And the reason for that is they think, well, I know somebody who's wealthier than me and I know somebody who's less wealthy, so I must be in the middle. And one of my first loves is anthropological psychology, the effect of human evolution on behavior. And the truth is that, we're a social species. And so we want to be in the middle. We very much want to be as much like everyone else as we can. And so we think we're the middle class. We think, oh gosh, I can't have trauma because I know somebody who had it worse. But that's not how it's gauged. And I think that, what you were explaining and what you were getting into is really, really, really well said. And I go back to the intake process in therapy when I talk about this, because I'll sort of set up some of the questions with my clients and say, I'm going to ask some personal questions that I think some people think that like sexual orientation will be the most personal question. And I always tell them, to me, it's not. To me, the most personal question on this list of things that I have to ask is, do you have a history of trauma, abuse, or neglect in your life? Because then you start getting into some nitty gritty that not everybody is excited to talk about. In fact, you'd argue most people are not excited to talk about. And what I do is I ask the question, and I would argue above 80% of my clients say, no, I've never experienced trauma. And I write down, no, I've never experienced trauma. And then I kind of put my computer down and I say, I wrote exactly what you told me. I believe you. But my experience is that most people will dismiss their own trauma. And in fact, there was this one client that I had not that long ago, and I say, somewhere in Malibu is somebody who wants to throw themselves off a cliff because they got a Mustang instead of a Porsche for their birthday. And I always say, oh gosh, that's not trauma. But the rocks hurt just as bad if you jump. It doesn't matter what triggered it. It matters how we take it, which is what you were getting to. I go, conversely, there could be somebody who's had a gun put to their head and, they think, oh, well, that's just an everyday Tuesday. And I stopped short because I remembered that was my story from growing up. And I thought, oh gosh, I've been telling this story for years and I kind of forgot that even happened to me, which illustrates that we contextualize. It's not about who's had it worse. It's about what have I struggled with. And I think that what you were getting into is so well said. Every human has had their own most traumatic experience. And if you are, the Prince of Persia, if you will, and your life has been, somebody feeding you grapes and fanning you with palm leaves, there has been a worse day. You've, had a stomach ache, you've had this, you've had that. And other people might say, oh, that's I'm going to dismiss that. It doesn't matter. That is your story. And it is important because it's yours.
Absolutely. And too, when we think of trauma, I also see a lot of focus gets thrown on the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Sure.
And I just as a professional, I just want to dispel that. Just because you've had trauma doesn't mean that you have PTSD. And that's not to negate any or displace anyone that does actually have it. But just because you've had a trauma or a trauma reaction to something doesn't necessarily mean that you have to get labeled as something. Trauma can come out in so many ways. Trauma can manifest as anxiety, depression. It can manifest as just even an adjustment disorder. So many different things come out of trauma. And it's important for us to remember that our experiences really can shape us and really can have an impact on us. From, anything you can think about, it can impact us.
I mean, it goes back to the old debates from school, which is, is it nature versus nurture?
Yeah.
And that's been a great debate in psychology for such a long time, but the answer is it's both.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's the context, it's what's going on now. That's absolutely what it is. There's something wrong.
I know you work particularly with veterans. I am curious about how the field of trauma, lands on your desk or in your office on a daily basis.
It's always there.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, it's always there. And a lot of it isn't always tied to combat trauma. A lot of it is just going through the military. There's so many things that happen in the line of military service. Accidents happen. Hazing happens. Assaults happen. All these things happen. And I honestly do believe that it's getting more recognized that there's so much more to trauma than just combat. And one thing I've noticed that the veterans community will struggle with is recognizing their own trauma. Like what you said, we tend to contextualize it. One thing that I've noticed is you'll have some veterans say, well, I wasn't in war, I wasn't in combat, I don't have trauma. You sure about that? Well, what else happened when you were in the military? And then they'll go into it, they saw a munitions accident, they saw a car accident of some sort, somebody got pinned against something, there was an assault, they got assaulted, they were part of something, they heard about something. And trauma too, that's something, it doesn't always have to happen to us, it can happen to somebody we know and care about. There's that secondary trauma that we often forget too, is big. And I honestly think maybe we as therapists can kind of forget about secondary trauma because we hear about it so much.
Vicarious trauma?
That vicarious trauma?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It dawns on me, hearing you tell the story too, that the role of the military is everything that we sort of know when we're playing a word association game. But one of the things that I think doesn't get brought up as much is that it is sometimes advertised as a way to change somebody's life. I need discipline in my life, or I want to leave this community, or I want to build a skill set, which is awesome, really incredible to me. But it can have the secondary benefit of removing somebody from a situation that was already previously traumatic into bringing that forward. And so the idea that your life prior to enlistment or commissioning maybe isn't as important as this new life that you're bringing on is maybe a fool's errand.
Absolutely, and so many times you see veterans talk about their life outside of the military. That's full of trauma too. Childhood has been full of trauma. Adulthood outside, separated from military, is trauma. There's so much trauma in veterans communities. I know that it can be a little dicey to say, well, what is necessarily veterans related versus non-veterans related? And when it comes down to what we're focusing now on just our purposes and our specifics, let's just focus on just how you're doing.
Yeah.
Let's see how you're feeling right now. What's really going on? How can we help you? And let's focus on that.
I like that quite a bit.
Because I feel like sometimes what happens is we look at things, we get things caught up in a clinical sense about, what's this trauma specific versus not trauma specific, or what's service connected versus not service connected. And I feel like when we try to split up trauma, we invalidate it.
Yeah. I think the big thing for the approach to it is And truth be told, I got this a lot through working with the post-incarceration population, but I get it with my veteran clients as well, is this idea that those who don't know or appreciate or understand or even have familiarity with the process think, oh, you're lucky you're home, or oh, you're lucky you got out. And the oddness, the unfamiliarity with the idea that there's this thing called survivor's guilt surprises so many people. And so, allowing somebody to be and asking how they're doing instead of suggesting, you must be so happy, can provide some space for those intimate conversations of, hey, how are you really doing, to come forward, which is how we connect to maybe prevent feelings of suicidal ideation from coming on, but also can help to identify them if they already exist, and then allow that bonding to happen. Because I think so many people are more apt to share more, to be more vulnerable when they feel like, oh, you might be able to get this. You get this with me.
I think sometimes in terms of like veterans, I think sometimes like our society puts like kind of this like privileged mantra onto veterans, and most of the veterans I know would say we're not privileged.
Right.
I mean, if anything, you've mentioned about the prisoner population. There's that oppressed population. We have a whole bunch of oppressed populations. Just social work 101.
Yeah.
There's so many different oppressed populations. Children, women are considered oppressed populations. LGBTQ are oppressed populations. Ethnic minorities, racial minorities are often considered to be oppressed populations. I remember back in grad school, hot debate, are people who were incarcerated, are they considered an oppressed population? When we look at the barriers people that have been incarcerated have faced, I'd have to say absolutely you have to.
Yeah.
Are veterans an oppressed population? I'd have to say a lot of the experiences that they've had.
And that's just
absolutely.
It. Right. They don't necessarily need the label to share the common, I don't want to say symptoms because that's not really the right term, but the common experience of there is, and you use the best word for it, there is this barrier. There is this extra step that I have to do in order to do something else. When I used to teach a humanities class a million years ago, one of the things that I would talk about when we got into things like the Enlightenment and the Age of Revolution was we're all a minority of something. Yeah. Whether it be I'm tall or I'm short, or I have this color hair or this color eyes, or sexual orientation, they can be, minority statuses that I would argue hide in plain sight. But we can all identify with this ability to think of ourselves as somehow uniquely oppressed. And this leaks into much larger conversations about race, class, and gender and things like that. But we can all appreciate that feeling. Some of us have to experience it in different ways, or more than others, if you will. But I think it's that part inside of us that can be that understanding to reach out to people who are going through it and say, like, I don't get it the same way that you get it. But man, I want to get it with you.
Yeah, I feel like we can see that in the lodge room too. I mean, how many lodges do we go to, and we've got somebody who, a hard time going up the stairs.
Yeah.
Or somebody who's got a hearing device, or somebody who's having a hard time seeing what you read or what have you. It's all there. Or just speaking.
Right.
It's all there.
So I think in the end, I think it really is about our ability to see within ourselves what somebody else might be going through, even if they're doing it for wildly different reasons.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, it's empathy, and it's the desire to reach out and bridge that gap and say, I don't know what you're going through, but I want to go through it with you.
Yeah. And I think that's why when we are worried about a brother, or a certain age, or companion, or cousin, or whatever title we want to throw out there.
Right.
We love our titles. We have to have what you just said about, hey, you know what, I don't know what you're going through there, but I'm there to walk with you. I'm absolutely there for you.
Yeah.
Absolutely there for you.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, thank you. If you're experiencing a mental health crisis right now, 988 is a great first option to call. 988 has the ability to counsel you, to give you resources, and can also basically dispatch to get you where you need to go. 911 is a good second option too if you need immediate assistance from the police.
I agree completely. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline is by far the way to go because they have the most resources. But if you are with somebody and trying to support somebody who's also going through it, it's a lot of the things that is mentioned in all of these episodes, which is be present, be aware, and just be human, be yourself, and admit what you can and what you can't do, but let them know that you're there with them through the process. And the end goal is safety until we can get to the next step. Thanks so much. We wish you all the best of health.